But right now, let's get into the Smoak Stack. First up, Ross Dellinger reporting that it's very close that the portal window will only be in the winter, December 9th to January 7th, and eliminating the spring portal window. It has to be picked up by the D1 Council if they adopt it, and it would take place this year if they do adopt it. So Coach has been trying to get the portal into a manageable space. I don't know how this is going to be met with opposition from the players at all, if they want to have a spring portal window or what, but the calendar needs to change no matter what. So I understand that there might be some tug of war on this over the years, but they have to try to do something to make it all make sense and make it easier for everybody to function in this. And December is just going to be a crazy, crazy month now. But I kind of get the feeling that they'd almost rather just do December a crazy month and then balance it out for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, something needed to be done. I mean, there was too many, I think for everybody's thought process, too many portal openings and closings to keep track of and just to have to deal with. If you're these universities, these football programs, I mean, as much as we're all very much in favor of the pendulum swinging the other way, and it has wildly swung the other way in terms of, player treatment and what they receive and all that. I just don't think it's good for the sport to have multiple free agency periods, basically. Mm-hmm. I think it's stupid. And there is an element of college football fan that just likes messy. And I don't know how big of a slice that person is. They're certainly probably the biggest voice on social media, I would think, most of the time, as far as those that love the chaos. And I love some of the chaos too, but I also believe that a good product has clear-cut, concise rules, and you kind of know the deal, and it should all operate pretty easily together. Now, you're never going to operate everything perfectly together because college football is just so unique with classes, and that's why. Well, why not just do it after the national championship game? It's because the semester started already. That's why you can't do it after the national championship game, because it's at the end of January now because of the expanded playoffs. So if you did that, then you'd have guys jumping in trying to get it into their new school out of the portal in the start of February, which that's not feasible at all. That doesn't make any sense. This is still a school-based sport. So you don't have that many options, but I do think just the calamity of having, double windows or all these different periods, it needs to be streamlined. It does. It needs to be more clear-cut. If you want to be professional sports, then have more professional sports set up in more of a, NFL free agency type of window. And so that's what they're going for, and I like that part of it because I think it just makes things more clear-cut and simple, but nothing's completely simple because, like I said, they have the uniqueness of having to worry about classes and semester starting and all of that. So I definitely have seen some pushback or some why not this date instead or why not that date. Problem is, folks, there's no perfect time to do it. Yeah. I mean, there's no perfect time to have a window because, again, you have what the pro leagues don't have, which is classes to worry about. So this isn't going to make everybody happy. It certainly hasn't based on all of the reactions I've seen to Ross's reporting. But I think most people agree that there needs to be a window. It's just that it's hard to settle on what the best window timing would be. And so they're going with this setup in December through January as far as the 9th through the 7th, and that's going to cover bowl season, and that's going to, be right in the middle of all the chaos of the playoff and bowls and coaching changes and all of those types of things. So, yeah, that's going to be very interesting to see that one month-long window. But, yeah, I don't know what are the better options. For those who don't like that option, which I'm not saying I think it's perfect, but for those that don't like it, what's the better alternative?
There's no good ideas. There's only varying levels of bad ideas or things that are going to be met with conflict. I also think that this is good for the players too, in at least this regard. I understand that they went from having zero flexibility to having almost too much flexibility. And there needs to be maybe just a slight correction in that because, it's going to help you. Okay, look, if you really want to leave here, you've got a month to decide to do that. You can't decide in a month and then go to a place and then not like it and then 2 months later do this all again. That's where I think it needs to just be compartmentalized to the month because, there are multiple players this last cycle who went to a place, decided they didn't like it, and then they transferred again at the end of the spring. Well, now you put yourself in a pickle, probably trying to find a place again that maybe knows more about what they're doing in roster wise. And two, the place that's brought you in and probably made you an NIL deal and all these other things now has to scramble and replace you because it wasn't a fit in the first place. So this should be about just make sure you make the choice that you want to make and then go do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the pickle, though. I mean, there's valid pushback on this. And I ask, like, what would you do instead? And there's plenty of people that say you do the spring portal window instead, which I get that. After spring ball, you have your rolling out of the roster, and everybody who's wanting to leave can leave, and that's usually a pretty busy time post-spring ball. I don't recall this past year. I don't know if I really paid super close attention.
It wasn't as busy.
Yeah.
Like
maybe that's
thought it was
playing
going to be more, but yeah.
Maybe that's playing into the thought of like which one, if you have to pick one, which one are you going to go with? So the December winter period was definitely the more active. That's when all the quarterbacks rolled off the board, basically. Like all the top players, for the most part, committed then. And spring was a little bit quieter because a lot of the top players had already made their choices earlier in the semester in this type of December, January window. So maybe that's what played into the decision to go with this rather than the spring. But I've seen plenty of you can't get rid of the spring window. So, yeah, I get that part of it, and that does sound a little strange. But, again, you have to do something to address this because clearly pretty much everybody involved is begging for something to address this. And I'd imagine in their conversations they didn't just blindly throw a dart, although it's the NCAA, so who knows. But you didn't just throw a dart and say, oh, December, all right, that's what we're going with. There's some thought that went into this, and maybe it was just the fact that December is by far the crazier period. Yes, it's going to overlap with bowl games. It's going to overlap with national championship games being played in the playoff or the path to the national championship. So I guess you're just not going to be able to ride through if you're planning on leaving Alabama and you're a receiver who's planning on transferring. I guess you're just not going to be able to go along for the ride all the way through January and then, leave right after that. You're going to have to make your decision prior to that to land at your school. I'm assuming that sounds like what's going to happen, right, with the one window. Yeah. So, that'll be a little strange, but let's see if this proposal passes and if this is where the road actually takes us. But it is definitely a controversial topic because plenty of people have pretty strong feelings on the best timing, and not everybody agrees on this December window.
Yeah, Barrett Crawford says, I'm with the Dragon. Spring transfer window, 15-day of open portal with a portal in December for coaching changes and hardship. That to me that makes a lot of sense. The problem is when you say hardship, then the NCAA they kind of have to just rubber stamp it because right now every time they say somebody doesn't have a hardship, they get pulled into court and been like, well, who are you to say that's not a hardship? And then they lose. But
not every time, because we've heard a couple of instances where that doesn't happen. But
it's for
the most part, yeah.
Yeah, they're not above the Mendoza line,
right.
Right? In that, but yeah, and part of this is going to be what is the bowl system going to be 5 years from now? How is because I think the playoff is going to kill off some of these bowls because it's just not. They're just not going to get the juice.
Well, it's already taken the most important ones and putting them in its own little pot to the side where the most importance lies. So, yeah, the Meineke Car Care Bowl is, never, and it was never on the same ground as the Orange Bowl, but now it's especially separated. So, yeah, I mean, that's the other thing that I didn't think about. But, yeah, there's been plenty of talk about what bowl season looks like. A couple of the comments I saw earlier today are well, what about bowl season? And I think a lot of people are like, what about bowl season? What about it? And that's another change going on, potentially in the wind that is something that we're all going to have to just kind of see and wrap our heads around what that looks like. I'm not an advocate for, eliminating bowls that aren't in the playoff or anything like that. I don't think anybody is because there's too much money to be made. But I just don't think that, but it's bowl season matters to the people making decisions because, again, you have to do it at some point in time. So if that, means that Oklahoma State doesn't have – their receiver and their running back because those guys decided that they're not getting playing time and they decided to transfer and they're not going to play in the Jiffy Lube Bowl. well, sorry, like it can't all be perfect. And, you know, I wish there was a better way, but I just don't know what else you do. So, yeah, it is going to have some interruptions for the bowl rosters, potentially. But I guess that's just one of those things you see when we get there. And if it became like an epidemic problem, then, you know, you'd probably go a couple years and then they'd probably find a way to address that if it was as big of an issue as maybe some people think it would be.
Yeah. I mean, and look, I think the other thing that's going to change here, the next thing that's going to change, and it'll take a couple years, but seeing how spring football went this year, I think the OTA model is where they're going to go. And if the OTA model happens, then maybe you do see the transfer portal window shifted to the spring, you know. And another good point Barry Crawford makes is, you know, once the schools start paying players directly, there's probably going to be more contractual things in that, because you're going to have to include those things in language for protection. So bowl opt-outs will probably come with like maybe a financial penalty, or like, well, you're not going to get paid for this bowl or this opportunity. But that's what they're going to have to do. The bowls are going to have to be straight up and down NIL games, bottom line, or they're not going to make it. And then, you know, we'll see. That way, you know, people may decide to play in them, because it's not just guys don't just opt out of bowl games and leave the school and go to the NFL. There's plenty of guys who opt out of bowl games because they've got a minor injury and they're like, well, it's not worth me. You know, I could probably play, you know, if this was the playoff, but I'm not going to re-sprain my ankle again for the Meineke Car Care Bowl. Like, I'm just not going to do that. So that happens a lot too. So we'll see how that develops. Next up, some shakeups at ESPN. Burke Magnus is the grand poobah over there, and they have now trying to hire a successor for the departed Norby Williamson, who clashed with a lot of people, most famously Pat McAfee. Pat McAfee just called him out on the air, which is not something normally you see somebody do, and call out their CEO, and kind of gotten a bit of a verbal fracas with them. And I'm curious, anytime you see an ESPN reorganization, like, what does that mean for the content on down the line? What are the new people going to do? Because I thought this the other day watching, it was about a month ago in a hotel when we were in Vegas. I turned on, Sports Center just to see if they were talking about Big 12 Media Days. I wanted to see if it registered with them at all. And man, and maybe this is just me being nostalgic, but Sports Center is boring now. I mean, it is super boring. They used to have anchors that were funny and engaging, and now it's basically just people reading the news, and it's not what it was. So I'm curious to see if that changes up with this reshuffling and where that goes. And they've already let go of some on-air talent. They let go of some executives. So here goes Disney and ESPN shaking things up again.
Yeah, and I got a story on Big 12 and UConn if you want to get to that before we get to Eddie Nunez from The Athletic. So there's a little something as far as Big 12 realignment to discuss here in a second. But, yeah, I mean, man, I mentioned some sports media stuff here and there and in the Off the Radar segment on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I don't keep super close track of sports media like moves and like the behind the scenes stuff too much with ESPN in particular. I sort of lost interest a long time ago as they've had these little battles going on. Like I know about the dust up you're talking about with Williamson and Pat McAfee, but I don't like knowing like Norby Williamson's name. You know what I mean? Like that's where it just starts getting too into the weeds for me. I don't care about the ESPN executive now, if it has a bearing on the product and all of that. Like, yeah, I understand having the conversation around them, but I'm with you on the Sports Center just being kind of like, I don't watch it. I just simply don't watch it. I don't need to watch it anymore. The highlights I watch on a website that has them. The news that I need to see, I see on social media. And if I want to read an article, I go to the page and I'll read the full-blown article from Chris Lowe or someone like that. But in terms of like must-see TV and all that, like I'm just watching for the games. I don't really care about Stephen A. I definitely don't care about Feinbaum or whoever else you want to throw in line. All due respect to them, but I don't know where all this leads for Disney and ESPN. We've been hearing about issues for a couple of years now, and I don't know where all that ends up for them. I just hope that they're still airing games because obviously there's a lot invested there. And so long as they do that, I'll be interested. But as far as their on-air programming, man, I stopped caring about that a long time ago.
If they were just games for like 10 hours a day and old school Sports Center for the other 14, I'd be maybe throwing it like, a PTI or around the horn to break it up, but they could do nothing else. And I'd be like, well, this is a great channel right here now. This is killing it. All I'm turning on is games or highlights of games. Love it. Mm-hmm. That's what I want. That's what I miss. So I just thought that was interesting. And dive in, Craig, to this UConn thing.
Yeah, so this just came down from Sam Kahn from
Chris Vanini,
Justin Williams, and Andrew Marchand from The Athletic. But Sam Kahn just tweeted it out. It's about the Big 12 and UConn, which we started hearing those rumors. What was it like last summer? That they were I remember last summer, they were on the verge of joining. It was about to happen. And then I don't think it had the support, and therefore it just sort of died on the vine and went away. Although every time expansion gets brought up, there's always the UConn mention because everybody knows, obviously Yormark has an interest in them, has an interest in being in the Northeast, and Eastern expansion is something that they have not addressed as much as they have the Western side of things. So here is from The Athletic. Brett Yormark has renewed his pursuit of expansion target UConn, with league officials set for a meeting next week where the issue will be reintroduced for in-depth discussion, according to multiple Big 12 admin and broadcasting sources. So if you just leave it right there, he's still interested. He's going to bring it back up next week, and they're going to talk about the validity of it and whether or not it's worth pursuing. It gets into his background and then says, according to multiple Big 12 administrators, I guess last August, not obviously this August, but last August, he said those talks were no longer. But according to multiple Big 12 administrators, discussions resumed earlier this year, but Yormark did not yet have a consensus internally to an extended invite. It's unclear whether support among Big 12 presidents has increased in light of these latest round of discussions. According to league sources, and any further expansion would require support from a supermajority of 12 of 16 in a president-level vote. UConn declined to comment. Big 12 did not immediately respond. And then it gets into Yormark feeling like basketball is undervalued and what a brand UConn is in basketball in particular. And then it gets into a lot of just kind of rehashing the recent history over the last year or so. And then it finally says, ESPN has previously considered adding more money to the Big 12's TV deal to help lure UConn, according to broadcasting sources briefed on the talks. Mm-hmm. ESPN is in Connecticut. Current members have been told UConn's addition would be budget neutral and would not reduce conference revenue payouts to existing members, according to multiple Big 12 administrators. So here you go. Yormark's reintroducing the idea. They've talked about it. They've stopped talking and resumed talking, and they've been resumed talking. And so now ESPN is interested, obviously, with the Connecticut connection and potentially raising the money, and it would be a budget-neutral addition, as I mentioned there. So I think those are kind of the highlights of that from what I just read. So, yeah, there you go. From The Athletic, UConn in the Big 12, and maybe something brewing there. I would not be surprised. This has been his kind of pet project. This is his. This is, from what I was told, this is Brett Yormark's, he's done so many things for the Big 12 that the presidents and ADs are like, look, whatever you want to bring to the table, we will consider. And this is one of his big ones, is UConn. Now, when it comes to ESPN and UConn, if you're wondering and you don't know the history of ESPN or where it is, the history of ESPN, the people who started ESPN are all UConn alums. Now, granted, it's a Disney property now, and there's a whole different thing, but the blood of UConn runs thick in Bristol, Connecticut, and ESPN. So if you're going to go at a school seemingly kind of randomly, that's kind of out of the realm and need to make a sales pitch that people with sway in Bristol will listen to, UConn is that too. Mm-hmm. Because they'd be like, oh, well, if this is going to help UConn, great, we're all for it. And, they want UConn on their basketball anyway. So, it's a win-win for
for them in the long run. And look, I would not be surprised to see it happen. I just know that it got shut down last summer because they're like, well, let's not focus on, like, UConn's not going to all of a sudden go like, oh yeah, F you, we're going to the ACC. And if they do, they do. They'll be there. Let's focus on the Pac-12 teams right now. And that's what they did.
Yeah, Big 12, try not to talk about realignment for 5 seconds challenge.
Yeah.
Impossible for this conference to not be involved in some sort of scuttlebutt about realignment, which I guess pick the day, and I'll tell you how I feel about that. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's just kind of like, can y'all focus on the field stuff? And so with the season starting, we're going to get a little bit of both, it looks like. But, yeah, I mean, this is obviously something that would make sense for ESPN given their love and the history with UConn, and obviously the basketball tie-ins are pretty easy to promote, that brand of basketball, throwing UConn in there with a Kansas or Baylor and everybody else that's a part of the mix. That makes a lot of sense. Geographically, I mean, you do need to go east more so than you need to probably go any other direction right now. So, I mean, that makes sense too. And so, yeah, therefore it checks some boxes. And clearly the biggest box that it checks is that it's an itch that Brett Yormark desperately wants to scratch, and has since the day that he arrived practically, because we've been hearing about this for, quite a while now at this point. It's just kind of popped in and popped out. But, yeah, I mean, obviously they're putting the word out there that there's some activity and that there's some talk about it. Doesn't ensure anything, but they are going to probably have some type of a vote to see if it's worth pursuing further. And, it makes me think that if he's still chipping away at this, that like maybe you spin one more vote and then you spin one more vote, and then eventually you get what you want if you're Brett Yormark, which is clearly UConn in the Big 12. I mentioned that it checks a lot of boxes. There's also a lot that I just don't feel like it makes a lot of sense. And I have nothing against UConn. If they are added to the Big 12, that's great. But I'm more of a college football fan. Like, the basketball thing's cool, but it's not like my love like it is for a lot of Big 12 fans. So, yeah, it'd be great basketball matchups, but as more of a football guy, it doesn't really do much for me. But, yeah, it would be great for the conference. And if it raises – like, here's the thing. If it makes the conference stronger, then you got to do what you got to do and do what you need to do to further strengthen yourself and to bring more money into the pot overall. And if that's, what it takes, then that's what Brett Yormark needs to do. And nothing against UConn. Like, I imagine Dan Hurley's probably not real thrilled after winning back-to-back national titles of like, let's pick this all up and go put it in a place where we have to suddenly travel all over the country instead of this niche that's very cozy and is obviously working very, very well for us. I don't know how much he'd be inclined to want to do that, or Gino Auriemma for that matter. I do know the Big 12 would be better with UConn men's and women's basketball.
Oh, hell yeah.
I don't know about any of the other sports because I can't speak on those outside of, I know football, they don't add to the pot. Like they would just meld into the pot. They wouldn't, make it bubble anymore. But certainly in basketball, they would. So that's been a big goal. I'm still like, man, you got to focus on football.
Yeah.
And that was the messaging like a month ago. But, basketball is still a big deal. And if Yormark really feels like there's more money to be squeezed out of there, then UConn makes a lot of sense on both the men's and women's front as well. So like I said, it makes some sense. It's also, a move that I don't think is going to thrill everybody or cause a lot of celebration necessarily, because it's not what some people are looking for, which is like a Florida State or a Clemson. It's also just, it's UConn. So it's not like in football, you're like, oh man, like we just added so-and-so. So I'm sure there'll probably be a bit of a mixed reaction, but if it's a matter of Brett Yormark going and grabbing more territory and adding more money, then that's what the job he was signed to do is. And that would be something you'd have to, celebrate. So yeah, we'll see where this takes us, but clearly they wanted to get it out there and have people like us and just everybody talking about it, because clearly there's some more discussions going on.